Well, I mean, Loki has animal companions in this chapter, so I wanted to have a little animal companion, although I have Brenda back here on the bed, but she's not very threatening. To be fair, neither is a stuffed snake. Don't look at me like that, you know that. Um, so, I had to work last night, so that's why this is going up this morning, or early afternoon by the time this actually goes up, because I had to record it this morning. Fun. Okay, time for chapter 1154, titled I Can't Even Die. So, before we delve too far into that, let's delve into what happens after death, or at least what happens after death in Wano. So, in the Yamato cover story, again, we see Yamato just eating. It looks like he's just eating like an apple of some kind, which is, I think it's a pun because I think Ringo had something to do with apples. Is for some reason what I think that translation came out to. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've talked about all the different regions in Wano, for what each of them means. But for the cover story that we have here, we have Yamato along with Ulti and Page 1, Kiku and Ocho, the Yakuza leader in the Ringo region, are taking all of them to, Kiku and Cho are taking them to one of the graves that we see in the Ringo graveyard, the giant frozen graveyard that Kawamatsu was in for a long time, where he was hiding out there with Onimaru for part of the 20-year time span. Not a large part of it, but part of it. And they're on their way to one of these shrines that we see. And Ulti seems to be having fun. She looks like she's starting to build like a snowman. Like it looks like she's rolling up a snowball, which is gonna be fun. Maybe she'll make a giant snow Kaido. No, maybe not. Maybe she'll make a giant snow Page 1 for how much she loves Page 1. Maybe Ulti is secretly an artist when it comes to snow. I have no idea. But they're on the way to visit one of these shrines, and the shrine is a grave of a hero born in the West Blue and brought up in Ringo. So this is supposed to be someone who was, judging by how dilapidated this thing is, to be fair, it's Ringo and stuff is frozen. Also, a couple of the swords that we see here, most of the swords that we've seen throughout the course of Wano were katanas. Barring a few exceptions here and there that I think like Inuarashi has like a rapier type weapon and then like, that type of thing. The majority of the swords that we saw that were used by the citizens native to Wano were katanas. Some of these do not look like katanas. And the tradition in Ringo and in Wano is, of course, when someone dies, particularly when a man dies who had his sword with him his whole life, they put the sword as part of his grave marker. And that's where Kawamatsu got all of the swords that he, pulled from the different gravestones in the Ringo, in the graveyard, and how he, restored them and everything else like that, chipped away all the ice and restored them and everything like that. And that's how they had weapons for the raid, for Onigashima. So, we see a lot of those same types of swords here that have been stuck into the ground, but a lot of them are not katanas, or several of them that are not katanas, that are more rapiers or something like that, cutlasses or things like that, less katana, more that. And the fact that this is the grave of someone who was born in the West Blue, which the West Blue does border the New World, so that's not completely unheard of, but someone born in the West Blue who then somehow ended up in Wano and was brought up in Ringo. So there's always we don't know how long ago this was. We don't know how old this shrine is, the grave, but it could be that this was someone who was born in the West Blue to either parents from Wano who had left Wano and then they returned to Wano and brought their child with them, or someone who had been born in the West Blue and then somehow, as a child, them and their parent or parents made their way to Wano, or they them separately somehow made their way to Wano via some horrible incident. We don't know how long ago this grave was made. This could be 100 years old, 200 years old, 300. We don't know. That might be something that gets revealed in the next chapter. Into this chapter, so we pick up essentially right where we left off in the last chapter, at the 63 years ago mark, just after Loki is born and has been dropped into the underworld, the frozen wasteland underworld by his mother, by Estrid, and then crawled his way back up. So we're picking up right where it left off. And this one is going over the incident that is the Semla incident, that is the Big Mom related incident. So we're kind of getting a recap of this. And it's 63 years ago, Jarl, the oldest man in the present day, lost his partner. Cascade Beard Jarl, or Waterfall Beard Jarl, was struck down dead by the hands of a certain young girl. And of course, we're seeing in the background, we see what is the aftermath of the Semla incident, where Big Mom, back when she was almost 5 years old, 63 years ago, that they were having, the solar festival, where they were all fasting and everything, and she was trying her best, and then unfortunately her hunger pain got the better of her, and she rampaged through one of the villages, the village that she was staying in, that's right near where the lamb's house, the sheep's house was. And she rampaged through there and caused a ton of damage, and eventually they were able to stop her, but unfortunately it was at the cost of Jarl's life. And this is where he passed, where he was killed by Big Mom. And the way that he dies is considered very unhonorable. It's not honored at all. And we know that Jarl even tried to end Big Mom during this incident, tried to kill her. But Mother Carmel stepped in and stopped him. And then that's why they left. So, it's like her name was Charlotte Linlin, a mere human. Yet she left a large part of a giant village in ruins. She would later go on to be become an emperor, earning the epitaph Big Mom. So again, this is back when Big Mom is 5 years old, barely 5 years old, and the whole incident happens. And of course, this causes her and Mother Carmel and all the rest of the ones at the sheep's house, lamb's house, however you want to put it, to have to leave Wano. Leave Elbath, and they do. That same year, Elbath faced a string of tragedies. It was calamity after calamity, sudden fires, windstorms, and bitter cold waves devastated the crops. The abnormal weather also brought fishing to a halt. This once magnificent land had fallen into famine, and we're seeing this was just how now. As is something that gets pointed out, Elbath is based on Viking culture, and Vikings were very good at surviving long, harsh winters. This is supposed to be a winter that is so much longer and harsher than they've had in a long time, where they are starving and their crops are dying and everything is going on like that. And there's animals down in the underworld, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to go down and hunt them. And even they're probably suffering as well if they're being affected by the same things. And we see these various giants that are essentially look like they're frozen solid in the snow and the wind and everything else like that. In the anime, I'm sure they'll have that whistling wind howling in the background when we're seeing these scenes in the anime, just to emphasize how cold and windswept these areas have become and frozen this land has become. And then we cut inside to the castle, where we see that Estrid is still on her sickbed, and she is like, "Now do you see? This is all that child's doing. This land was cursed because you all failed to kill it immediately." And we see the guard who's like, "But no, surely it's just a coincidence." And Estrid is still just terrified of Loki, and is causing her own sickness to a degree. And we see Loki just pushing his way through the door, going, go! Because it's like he still just wants his mother. He still just wants this parental love, this acknowledgement of anything besides just hatred. And Esther, bursts into the room, and Esther is just like, keep him away from me. He's staring at me. Keep him away from me. And, the guard is, is trying to gently get Loki out of there. And, they have, several other guards come in. And, we have Esther just screaming. It was like, take it away. Don't ever let that monster near me again. And Loki is just, he's just crying. He's a baby who has no idea what is going on. He just wants his mother. And, he's being, pulled out of the room by the guards to get him away from Estrid. And it's like, Prince Loki, you have to keep away from your mother's room. And Estrid is still shouting, gouge out those monstrous eyes. If left unchecked, his curse will grow till it brings about this nation's collapse. And so, this is going into Estrid and all of her prophecies and everything else like that. I'm kind of picturing her being a little bit like Trelawney from Harry Potter, where anytime that she's actually making predictions, that's just like, no, don't sit there, no, you're going to break this, or no, you're going to do that, or something like that, it does still end up coming true. Not her predicting everything about, Harry's death every single year. I mean, yes, essentially Harry does eventually die in the series, but it's not that's not what she's, predicting and everything else like that. Or it's just like Estrid is so fixated on this that what she is predicting technically comes true. I mean, here with the complete destruction of the nation. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but there's the whole theory right now that, Loki's destruction of because of Loki and everything else like that, that it is going to cause this horrible destruction of Elbath in the process. Because of everything that's going on with the God's Knights and Emu and everything else like that. So Loki here just wants his mom. And the thing that I point out here, also going into Harry Potter, is kind of Voldemort. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, particularly the books, they don't go over this as much in the movies, but in the books, you find out that Tom Riddle's mother, Merope, that she died very shortly after he was born, within a day or so after he was born. She lived long enough to name him, and then she died. And then Tom grows up in the orphanage with no maternal or paternal type of love, no familial love around him. And yes, he's taken care of by the people who work at the orphanage, but the way that it's implied is because his mother was strange and he's strange, that he's just shunned by everybody else there, but they can't just throw him out because he's a child. And Voldemort, as Tom Riddle, just develops this complex of, he doesn't have his full range of emotions. There's also another theory that part of it is because he was conceived with the love potion, and that means that he's not, that he doesn't have his full range of emotions. Part of your emotions, particularly your ability to love and have empathy and stuff like that, are taken away from you. So kind of, I guess, a little bit the way that, Judge has programmed, his sons. For they don't have negative emotions or weak emotions as he sees them. Although at the very least, the Sanji's brothers do at least experience lust and enjoyment. And Voldemort, I hope to God, doesn't experience lust, as anywhere you want to go near the cursed child. But you get the idea. So it's what they're showing here is Loki is just, because he is being just completely and utterly gatekept by his mother, just, ignored by her beyond anything that's not just screaming at him. He's not giving, and Karl isn't back yet. So, and Hyrudine and Ida, they're not there. So they're not, they're not in the castle. So they can't even be a part of this, because we are all quite certain that if Ida lived in the palace, in the castle with Hyrudine, that if they lived in the castle right now, she would be doing her damnedest to try to help take care of Loki. And maybe some of these problems wouldn't end up happening the way that we see, but she's not allowed to. She's not allowed to. So we cut into more of what is going on with Elbath outside of the castle. And we just see like a small child crying, and like they're just hungry and everything. And the mother is trying to comfort them, and just like, I'm sorry, sweetie, that was the last bit of bread we had. And then we see some of the other giants, and they're like, you're going reaving, going raiding and everything else like that, which is one of the things that happened with the Vikings, was that one of the reasons that they went to other countries to, steal their food and everything else like that was because they didn't have food at home, because they were having these horrible, horrible famines, and they needed food. And it was just like, well, they have food over there, so we're going to go get it and bring it back here for our people. Might makes right. So it's just like, we could easily steal what we need from the humans. And then it's just like, ain't that how it's always been in Elbath's history? And then the other giant is just like, don't be ridiculous. A senseless raid on them would only bring shame to Elbath. That's the law of the land now. So this is going back on, possibly hundreds and hundreds of years ago, if this had happened to Elbath before, they would just go and raid the humans. And that's where a lot of the terrifying stories of the giants came from, and why so much of the human population, the human world and the One Piece world, is so terrified of giants, and why even the giants who are not from Elbath have this horrible reputation, because they would go and raid other islands because they could. So we see here, and it's just like, those bastards from Hunter's village are attacking it. It's just like, what? They are? And it seems that they've hit other villages too. And it's just like, quick, arm yourselves. Don't let them loot the village. So again, it's like, we're kind of getting a picture painted here that the villages on Elbath at the moment are more secluded from each other. They're not as united as like they are in like the present day in the One Piece world, with like we see them. It's like part of that was possibly brought on by the school, and then just other things that Harald does to like bring Elbath together, as opposed to having it be like this village, this village, this village, this village, and this village, and like all the different areas. He wants to try to have them be more connected. And we're going to see the result of that later. So it's like internal giant struggles weren't unheard of during desperate times. But these incidents only resulted in making the period even more severe and bloody. And we see them just like attacking each other. One of the panels is like a village being burned. Another one is just a hand laying there with like an axe stabbed into the ground and what's clearly supposed to be blood. And it's just like the country was engulfed in chaos and misery, and the bitterness festered as spirits broke. And we see like this old giant, and he's just like, I heard a rumor about that princeling born in the castle. He's cursed. And then we see them showing up at the village where Hyrule and Ida live. And they're specifically showing up there to go after Hyrule and Ida, specifically Hyrule. And we see this, and this is supposed to be... I think this was like the Western Fishing Village or something like that. It's like the same village that like we've spent a good chunk of time in already, where like they were having the banquet, I believe. And like they're showing up here and bursting into the house where Ida and Hyrule live. And it's this old giant, and he's just like, hey, Hyrule, he's shouting at them, your brother doomed this country with his curse. As his elder brother, you'll take responsibility as a sacrifice. So this giant is just showing up here, and he's just like, okay, time to kill this kid, because the half-brother in the castle is the one who's causing these problems. And Ida just steps in, and she's like, what are you talking about? Don't you know he's, my son's a cutie who's gonna be the world's longest living man? Okay. I like this, because she is probably well aware of how old Yorl was and how old Jarl currently is, which at the time is still like 300 and something years old. I don't remember the exact number, but 340, 50 something years old, whatever it was. And she's like, my son's gonna be the longest living giant. And I'm just like, okay, I mean, like, that might just be something where it's just like, as long as Hyrule survives all of the battles and everything else like that, this battle here on Elbaf, any future battles, as the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, as one of the commanders there, into other stuff. It'll be quite interesting if, like, we cut ahead in the future, like, after the epilogue of One Piece, like, we get, like, a thing where it's, like, really old Hyrule sitting as, like, a giant in Elbaf, and or like somewhere else in the world, as like the king of all giants, as he's, you know, as he proclaims he wanted to be. He's like, I'm going to win the Marinami in order to become the king of all giants. And it might be something where it's just like he does achieve this and he like unites all the giants around the world. Not into like one nation, but something like that. And he like has this title, and like he dies as like a 400 and, you know, maybe he barely outlives Jarl. Like, you know, like if Jarl dies in this arc, maybe it'll be like Hyrule just barely outlives him later on, you know, 100 something, you know, 400 something years down the line. And, you know, he outlives him that way. Back to serious thing of Ida and Hyrule being threatened. And this guy, this giant that has shown up, has like grabbed Ida by the throat, and he's just like, can it, Ida? You're nothing but an outsider who seduced Harald. And she's like, go to hell. I love this country. So again, it's like we're having this thing where it's just like there are still people who live on Elbaf who view Ida as nothing more than this person who came in and seduced Harald, and then is like essentially controlling him to try to make peace with the rest of the world, to try to make alliances and get rid of customs and be weak and feeble and everything else like that because of this. And this is something that has happened so many times throughout the course of even our own history of the world, where it's just like, oh, the king's been seduced by a witch, or, you know, they were this amazingly strong ruler and then something happened and now they're like this and all they want is peace and everything else like that. So many different things like that. And, you know, so we're getting this, but we also have it from Ida's perspective here, who she loves Elbaf. She's been there long enough. She's learned so much about the culture and everything else like that. And her son is here on Elbaf. This is where he was born. This is where Harald is. She's made so many friends in the village that she lives in. All that type of stuff. And she just, you know, she wants to try, you know, she loves this island. And we're going to see, again, in a little bit, how much she still cares about this island so much. And Hyrule has grabbed his soul, and he's like, don't lay a finger on my mom. And then thankfully we have right at that moment is when Harald bursts through the door and like essentially like accordions this giant. He gets Charlosed, where he just like bashes this giant in on the head, and he's just like, I'm gonna flatten you. And they're like, oh, King Harald. And then Hyrule's just like, Daddy. And then Ida's just grabbing him, and you know, Hyrule's just like bawling his eyes out because, you know, a scary thing just happened, and he was very concerned about his mom. Fair. And Harald, and you know, and like Ida's like, Harald, and like grabbing him to hug him and everything like that. And then Harald is like starting to give the speech. He's like, brothers, you must not fight amongst each other. And they're like, oh, it's the king. And he's just like, word reached me about Loki's birth and the recent famine. I was building a repartee, or a rapport, with various nations. When the news came, our allies acted without hesitation. They loaded tons of food and supplies to be shipped here. Our allied nations came together to ensure that we got enough to truly fill and satiate our giant bellies. We will graciously accept their aid. Dig in and fill your hearts with gratitude. And we see all of these ships just like laden so heavily with all of this food and supplies and everything else like that, you know, heading toward Elbaf. One of them does kind of look like a Wano ship. At least one of them. The other ones I'm not so sure about because like we've seen so many different types of ships throughout One Piece, and there's some that are slightly more associated with like one kingdom than the other. But that's more based on like either the flag that it's flying or a symbol on its sail. But there's one of these that at least looks like it's a Wano ship, at least one, if not more, or possibly another one that's like an Alabasta ship. Just for that regard. And we see just all of the giants are starting to just like, with relief, they are eating and everything else like that. And it's just like, they're just like shouting at each other. They're just like, Harold, how are we supposed to dock on the island? And there's, it's like, it's so big and everything like that. So it's like, they're saying that there's no like port along the outside of the island is what they're saying here. So this is then leading into just like all of the giants are now able to eat. And it's just like, if these good folk are ever in a pinch, it'll be our job to return the favor with all our might. Remember, this tiny world is ours to share. So again, we're just seeing this, how much Harold has changed. And how he's like, he wants to, and how his generosity and his wanting to build these bonds with all these other countries now saved Elbaf in this moment. It's like, it's like all of these allies that he's been making are just like, oh, your country's in trouble? Of course we will do what we can to try to help you. It's just like, start gathering what we can and everything else like that to send to Elbaf. And it worked. It saved the country, and I love that. So now we cut ahead, just probably not even a year, if that. And it's Queen Estrid continued to publicly declare the plagues suffered by Elbaf were brought on by the accursed prince right up until the eve of Harold's return. So she's been proclaiming this all the way up until Harold's return. And then she either just stops or that's when she dies, because we see that we are seeing Estrid's funeral here. And it's just like, she denounced her son with bitter hatred until her final anguished breath. So she's just like completely like, no, he's not my son, he's not my son, he's not my son. This cursed thing, this horrid thing, this wretch is not my son. And then she dies. She dies with her heart full of hatred toward a child who has done nothing wrong to her and who only wanted a mother, who only wanted love of some kind. And now we cut to where we see Harold with baby Loki, and he's lifting Loki up, and he seems very happy to see Loki, but Loki already has bandages wrapped around his eyes. So the guards who worked at the castle, they did not gouge out Loki's eyes, but they're the ones who put the bandages on the eyes. And it's like, naturally, the people believed her passing was part of the curse. And we have Harold just, holding Loki, and he's talking to the guard, and the guard's like, he was born with a condition that affects his eyes. Well, he could see, but... So it's implying that maybe, like, his eyes just look strange. Now, we don't know if Harold ever actually sees Loki's eyes. He probably does at some point, but I don't know. And Harold's just like, oh, I understand. What a pity. He's just like, he can't even smile for me. I guess it makes sense. He did just lose his mother. So Harold is unaware of the fact that Estrid... I guess has, didn't have a bond with Loki and everything like that. Although, given everything she was saying about him, I would be like, okay, what is wrong with you? This is a child who did nothing wrong and who is completely innocent. But we have that, like, at only a few months old, Loki had given up on love. So again, this is a whole thing of just like Loki, who had been trying to even try to have some type of a bond with his mother, with someone, didn't get it. He didn't get this bond that he wanted, this love that like a newborn requires, because they literally cannot do anything for themselves. Walking her this morning, we ran into one of the ladies who lives around here, and like she has 4 kids and she has a newborn, and she has the baby strapped to her and everything else like that, keeping the baby very close to her to keep it safe and keep it warm and comfy next to her. Yeah. And I have like cousins that have had their kids recently, and like they just dote on them, and I have no problem with that. Just giving them lots of attention and affection and everything, keeping them safe. And we also have Harold here like looking over Loki, and he's like, you sure have a lot of scrapes. And the guard's like, oh, those are... So assumedly this is supposed to be like the guard going, oh, Loki kind of just likes to roughhouse a little bit. Like, scrapes himself up or whatever like that. As opposed to like, yeah, well, your wife, the late queen, she threw him off the balcony and into the underworld when he was first born. And he climbed out, and she subsequently continued to ignore him and just curse and swear at him and blame him for everything. Yeah, that's not necessarily the best thing you want to tell the king about what his wife did. That's slander against your queen, but it's also child abuse. So now we have Harald has gathered. We cut to another panel. It's like Harald has gathered together these different, possibly village leaders, and he's like, Harald's diplomacy soon started to bear fruit, and Elbaf's winter finally came to a close. So he's pointing out these different routes that they can set up on these different branches, and it's just branch route 1 is just that's right. It'll help build inter-village trade and communication. So it's not only Harald is looking a little more internally at this point in time, although not exactly at the place that he should be looking as internal, with his own children. And what happens is he's okay, well, I've proven that building these alliances outside of the kingdom with all of our allies and everything else like that is a good thing. So what can I do within Elbaf to start building alliances and better friendships and communication between the different villages this way? So this is what he's starting to do with set up all these different routes that have probably been there, but now he's trying to make them easier to traverse or something like that. And Harald may have been the one who worked on trying to set up the different types of firefighting setups that they have in Elbaf and everything else like that. Worked on figuring that up or more streamlining it, possibly as well. And we're cutting into where we see Loki again, and it's just restoring the fractured nation and venturing across the seas continued to be prioritized, while other things became an afterthought. Estrid's older brother was appointed as Loki's personal steward, so little Loki is now being taken care of by Estrid's brother. And again, this guy is just with freak, just calling Loki a freak this whole time, given what's going on. Now, cut to another familiar location. We cut to the outskirts of Elbaf on the shoreline, and we see that the pub has been built. And this is the same pub that we saw when we kind of first saw Elbaf with Shanks and Dorian Broggy and the bar and everything else like that, where we met Colin and Mateo. And this is apparently the pub apparently was built about 62, 63-ish years ago by Ida. And her and Hyrule are possibly going to live here at the moment. And he's like, this is the realm of the dead. Isn't it dangerous here? And she's like, the coastline keeps this area separated so the beast won't come here. And she's like, you're so cute when you're worried. And she's pinching his little cheeks. And we see her pulling, she has a beer tap set up. And I love how the handle on it is an axe. I love that. The handle on this thing is an axe. So she's setting this all up. She's like, don't you have training with Elbow from West Village? You should head back. I don't know. I don't think we've met Elbow. But we did see in the Big Mom flashback that Hyrule was supposed to be being trained by Raiden, I believe, who was one of the other giant warrior pirates. And Ida's continuing. She's like, this is Ida's Tavern, you hear. Fishermen, castaways, even pirates. I'm ready for any and all customers. With any luck, I'll be of help to Harald. So she's hoping to kind of act as a little bit of an ambassador. Where as she deals, as other people come to Elbaf to, even if they're just pirates that are stopping off and they're just we're just here for the log post to reset, we just need a safe place to stay, we won't bother you guys, and then they'll head on, or we're just here to get supplies and we'll leave, we don't want to cause trouble, or it's just we're here to cause trouble type of a thing. We'll see what happens there. So now we're going to cut ahead to 56 years ago. Now, I did want to point out a few things. So, there was still, I'm kind of thinking the community is probably going to move away from the theory about Kaido being Harald's like long lost son somehow. So, just for the context of this, Kaido and Kazuki Oden by extension were both born 59 years ago. So this would have been in this time frame in between here. Now, it is quite possible that Harald may have done this in his grief, but that doesn't seem like something he would do. Ida seems like she is his true love, and then Estrid was his queen, even though it was like kind of against his will, and all of that set up. So it is quite possible, but it's very, very unlikely that Kaido has any relation to Harald beyond the fact of, like, they both clearly seem to have, like, ancient giant blood of some kind. Maybe we'll find out that there's some other connection. I don't know, but, that's what we get here. So, then we get into 56 years ago. So, for timeline-wise for events, the only major event that we know of that happened 56 years ago was Sengoku, Garp, and Tsuru joined the Marines. That's about the only one that we have there for a major event. For Burst 56 years ago, we have Brand New, who's the Marine kind of information officer, Kinemon, Vinsmoke Judge, Sion, who is Queen, and then Ashura Doji. They were all born 56 years ago, so those are kind of like the timeline of like what's happening currently in the One Piece world 56 years ago. So we get to 56 years ago, and this is now at Jarl's house, which is this nice house that he has, and apparently he has like a little flower garden out front because we see him like watering it while he's sitting here talking with Harald. 56 years ago, so this has been about like 7-ish years since the Big Mom incident, since the Semla incident. So Jarl and Harald are talking, and Jarl's like, "You were at the scene of the Reverie incident, Harald." And Harald's like, "Yeah, my friend was one of the invited kings. He smuggled me in as one of his guards. I couldn't ask the questions I wanted to without blowing my cover." So this is essentially setting up. So 56 years ago, oh frick, what was so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. What, like over 10 reveries ago. 10. My brain doesn't want to math. So about 14 reveries ago is when they're talking. And Harald apparently managed to find his way into a reverie by pretending to be like a guard of some kind for one of these other kings that was his friend. Now, a part of me kind of wants this to be a connection to like Dressrosa, just because we don't, like Dressrosa is a kingdom that wouldn't necessarily be super far away from Elbaf. It's in the New World, and it would be a kingdom that Harald would very easily be able to get to. And having a connection there to like the Riku family would be kind of nice. And it would not have been Riku Dole III. If anything, it would have been either his father or grandfather. That would have been the king at the time, or the ruler at the time. But it could also just be some other kingdom that we haven't heard of yet, and that might be something that gets brought up. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the West Blue is one of the countries that borders the New World. I think it's the West Blue and the North Blue that border the New World. So it's quite possible it could just be a kingdom from one of those countries. maybe it was Judge's father, for all we know. Father or grandfather or something like that. That was this king that Harald had a friendship with, for all we know. But Harald managed to kind of smuggle himself in here as one of the guards. That's quite a task. Gets to reverie with this king, and like all the other kings and queens are like, that's quite the interesting guard you have there. Assuming that's a giant. Yes, this is Harald, or maybe you had to have like a code name or... This is Harry. Yeah, he's one of my guards. He's new. Yeah, he's a giant. He's not from Elbath. He's from another area. Maybe, Okay. Thoughts. In the previous chapter, Ida mentioned that she is from, I think it's Samuwani, which is this, an area where giants live in the West Blue. No, South Blue is where she's from. So, my thought, and we know that Harald has been to Fishman Island, so if anything, they would be able to try to, like, sail through Fishman Island and sail into, the Paradise side and go into the East Blue and the South Blue. Harald may have made his way to Samawani at some point in time and maybe befriended the king there. That's a possibility. Told them that that Ida is his love and that they have a child together and everything else like that. So there's a possibility there. But we're not aware of any giants that were at Reverie, that have been at Reverie in the past. And the last group, at least of the 50 kings that were at Reverie this last time, none of them were giants. There was Neptune, but there weren't any giants that were there as like a representative. Do you want me to open the door for you so you can go out and see Grandma? So there's various possibilities there. It could just be a country we haven't heard of yet. And Harald continues, if that murder hadn't happened, I might have been exposed. So essentially what happened was there was this murder of one of the kings. And we're going to find out at the end of the chapter kind of a little more information about that. So Harald's like, yeah, there was this murder that happened there. Otherwise, if that hadn't happened, I might have been exposed. We don't know. Well, we're going to find out that it was I think it was a Navy admiral that was killed. Is what we're going to learn later. And we're going to learn who killed said Navy admiral. But we'll get to that in a minute. So Jarl's like, yeah, if you were caught, all this would be the least of our worries. Haven't you heard the tale of the Gale Raw Warhammer Company? And now she wants back in the room. She's returned. So Jarl mentions this Gale Raw Warhammer Company is the way that it's set up here. Translation note, Great Hammer Battalion, and it might be a reference or a spin-off from the Galley Law Company, which is the Galley Law Company is the name of the shipbuilding company that Iceberg is the head of in Water 7. A little bit of information there for what we at least know about Water 7. So it's an island that is slowly sinking. We learn this throughout the course of the arc. We learn that the current group of houses are built on top of the last group of houses, and they have to rebuild every several decades as the island keeps sinking. So again, it's based on Venice. I went through a bunch of this already, I believe, when I talked about Water 7, when I talked about Iceberg. So Water 7 used to be on dry land, and it was this shipyard island where they would make these amazing ships and everything else like that. But unfortunately, centuries ago, water began to rise, and the island essentially, to a degree, began to sink. Now, as we have learned via Vegapunk, we know that the islands aren't necessarily sinking. although Water 7 might be one of the exceptions to that rule, depending on stuff. But the water level is rising to the point where it's getting much more noticeable now. And, little bits of increments over over a year, you're not going to notice. Little bits of increments over, several decades, 100 years, you're going to notice. And, the water was slowly rising. And so what they did was they then just continued to build the current houses on top of the ones that were sinking. Like, we see this throughout the course of the Water 7 arc. With Aqua Laguna and everything else that happened there. Also, we know that centuries ago, generations ago, the ancient weapon Pluton was constructed on Water 7 before it was shipped off to Wano. And the blueprints survived and were passed down through the generations. Eventually, those blueprints ended up with Tom, and then he gave them, showed them to Iceberg and Frankie, and then Iceberg had them for a while they thought Frankie was dead, and then when Frankie showed back up again, or when Cutty Flame showed back up again, Iceberg then entrusted the blueprints to Frankie, and then we know that CP9 were there because they were trying to get their hands on the blueprints. That didn't end up happening. They found the fake documents, and then when they were all at Enies Lobby, Frankie pulled out the real ones, proved they were the real ones, and then set them on fire. Yeah. So, this Warhammer battalion that they are referencing here could be a possible branch or an extension of the Galley Law Company. We'll see how it ends up being translated for the official translation. And someone will probably end up asking some information about it in like an SBS or something. So maybe by the time the volume comes out that has this in it, we'll get some questions about that. Or we'll have something else where we learn a little bit more information about them. We'll learn a little bit about them in a second, but they're like this, shipbuilders of some kind. Also, they carry giant effing hammers, which I just like, which is a reference to Thor. And we also know that Loki's weapon of choice later on is a hammer. We see that with Ragnar and with the hammer that he had in like the beginning of this flashback 12 years ago. So Harald is now saying, yeah, they're that gruff troop of giant shipwrights that arm themselves with war hammers, right? I thought they were just a myth. So giant shipwrights, they were clearly connected to Elbath at some point in time, and it may just be something where it's like this leftover memory from the Void Century, combined with like a connection to Water 7. And Harald's like, no, they existed. They really did travel far and wide, sending letters back to Elbath. I received the final letter myself. It said they'd been captured. So, Jarl, who is at this point in time 360 something years old at this point in time in the story, during this flashback, he's like 350 60 something years old, and he's like, yeah, I remember receiving the last letter that they sent. So it would have been within his lifetime, which would still very easily tie into Galley Law, and it may have been that Iceberg knew about the Galley Law from Tom, and then he named his company Galley Law after it. So it might be like a retroactive thing where it's like, the way that this is spelled in the chapter for the translation is Gale, and then like the E has a little apostrophe thing over the top of it to submit, a different sound. And then there's a way that Galley Law is spelled in the manga and the anime for the official translation. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. And it may have just been, he's like, well, he'd only heard it said, so he spelled it that way, like a galley, like the galley of a ship, is the way that Iceberg ends up spelling it. So Jarl continues, and it's just like, can you believe it? Over 100 giants were taken prisoner, including ancient giants. So, some point in time in the last 400 years, there were this huge group of giant shipwrights that went about the world and would send missives and messages and everything else like that back to Elbath, telling about their adventures. And Jarl knew them, and Jarl probably did too. They may have been like a previous-ish generation of like, not like the giant warrior pirates, but like something along those lines. I was like, well, giant warrior shipwrights who just go around and build ships for different countries. I don't know. Whatever the case may be there. And at some point in time, they got captured. Presumably by the world government and the Marines, because of course they were. Because the world government, Emu, Elder Stars at the time, saw them as a threat. So they captured them. And Jarl's like, you think the world government was responsible? And Jarl's like, there's no doubt that they once faced a giant army. However, they sank deep into the ocean at a certain point in history. To be blunt. And he's like, there's probably a deeper reason why your ideas haven't worked. Your ideals haven't worked. And it has nothing to do with you. So, the way that we are presented with Jarl and Jarl in the original flashback with Big Mom is that, while they are not diametrically opposed to Harald's ideas of wanting to stretch out a hand to the rest of the world, make alliances, different things like that. They're just also of this mindset where they're like, there's a lot of bad blood between us and some of those countries, including the world government, given everything that has happened. There's a lot of bad blood there on both sides. We've attacked them, they've attacked us. Various things like that. Also, a long memory of like a cultural memory with giants and everything else like that, dating back so far. And Jarl's here and he's like, yeah, it may not necessarily be just you that's having the problem here. It's the fact that there's possibly various giants on the island who have had parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever, or friends who were hurt by the world government in some shape or form, or like another ancestor that got hurt and that's been like passed down in the family. So they're like, I don't want to have to ally with the world government type of a thing. Now, Harald, as we saw in the previous chapter earlier in the flashback, doesn't necessarily want to align himself with the world government. He's annoyed at the world government for the fact that they're like trying to stop him from making these different connections with other kingdoms. So there's a difference there. But I think eventually he's like, I may just have to swallow my pride and do this. And I think that's what's going to happen. And Harald is sitting there drinking his grog or his beer or his mead or whatever. And he's like, lingering anxiety, huh? Yeah, over this whole setup here. And Jarl continues, and it's like, these are just rumors. But I also heard a story about a frozen army of giants somewhere. It seems our people are regarded as enemies of the larger world. So, time to bring up a callback. Last chapter had a lot of callbacks. This is going to have a callback here. The callback here is all the way back to Punk Hazard, when Nami, Chopper, and the Biscuit Room children are running around the labs on Punk Hazard trying to find a way out. One of the places they run into is this giant freezer. And they go inside, and all around them are frozen giants. Like, just huge, like, clearly giant, some that might be more close akin to, like, humans the way that, like, Kaido and Big Mom and Whitebeard are humans, and Buccaneers and something like that. And they're all in prison clothes, and they're all frozen solid in this giant freezer room. Nami, Chopper, and the kids just see all of this, and they just run out of there and run the other way. I don't believe we ever saw that room again. I don't think Nami and Chopper have mentioned it, but they all run the other way. That is probably what they are referencing here, this frozen army of giants somewhere on Punk Hazard. This could be this Galli-Ra Warhammer battalion that were captured by the world government, and then maybe a former user of Aokiji's devil fruit worked for the world government at the time, and froze them all and did that. Kind of funny that it's on Punk Hazard, given the fact that the half of Punk Hazard that it is currently on is also like irreparably changed because of Aokiji, because of Kuzan. So there's like that there. That is probably what they are referencing there. Or there's another giant army that's frozen in cryogenic stasis somewhere out in the world. I don't know. So Harald's like, clearly, but I've already resolved to face any hurdle. So we cut to the castle. It's like, Prince Loki, I know you cursed and killed my little sister, Prince Loki. So this is Estrid's brother, who probably someone will ask, what's Estrid's brother's name? And then he'll get like some type of pretentious name or something like that. Either pretentious or stupid name. We'll find out later. And he is the one who has essentially been raising Loki since Estrid died, and Harald is still off building relations with other countries and focusing more on Elbath as a whole, as opposed to at least paying some attention to his son. The reason it's probably Estrid's brother as the steward, as the one taking care of Loki, is probably simply just because of politics. They're like, well, my sister died, so I should be the one to raise Loki, so he has some connection to his mother's family. Again, things would be a lot different for Loki if Ida and Hyrudine lived in the castle, and Ida had this time to like try to be a mother to Loki when his own mother wouldn't, because we know she would have, because it's just the kind of person she is. So we're gonna see this kind of like a bit of here of like what Loki goes through at the hands of the steward, at the hands of Estrid's brother. And he's like, now let's see what kind of garbage we'll be serving up today. And we kind of see this, and it kind of jumps through the years as like Loki is growing up. His hair is growing, his horns are growing, and we're just like, oh, the horse of fortune died. So this is the Ashura, the giant horse that's supposed to be based on like Odin's horse, dies. And then it's just like, oh, the steward's body was in the realm of the dead. So it's like the steward has died, Estrid's brother died at some point in time, and this is when Loki's looking about kind of how we saw him in some of the flashbacks, where like we start to see him as like bigger than Hyrudine, just because like he's born as a bigger baby, so he's going to be bigger than Hyrudine anyway, and all of that stuff. And we just kind of see that go and go and go. And now we're going to kind of head to 48 years ago for a bit of a timeline reference here. For 48 years ago, there weren't really any major events 48 years ago, but for the births that happened 48 years ago, we have Charlotte Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven. And also Genzo was born 48 years ago. So there's that. Not really too much else that happened timeline-wise 48 years ago, beyond this incident that we're going to see here now. So 48 years ago, before present day, the villagers drew closer in terms of trade and identity, and the nation stood together. So via Harald's building of like these different pathways and everything else like that, making them easier to get around to and stuff like that, to help connect the different villages together and encourage this inter-island and inter-village trade, these bonds are getting stronger, which is good. And Harald is continuing. He's like, my dream is to join hands with many other countries around the world, for the giant race to be welcome all over this grand world. And he's got like some fangirls and fans, and it's just like, oh, King Harald's so cool. And he's just like, he's changed so much. He's going to be a king who will go down in history. Yes, he is. Let's just hope it's going to be for the right reason. And now we're going to cut to where we see that like, one of the few interactions that probably Loki and Hyrudine had while they were children. And so we see Loki and Hyrudine are both at this event, and Loki has these two guards with him. And the guards are mocking Hyrudine. It's just like, well, you look thrilled, Hyrudine. Is it because you're illegitimate? Is because you're illegitimate, Prince Loki is the true heir, right? And Hyrule and like Loki are kind of looking at each other, and it's just like, you're just an illegitimate throwaway. And Loki has this smirk on his face, and Hyrule is, insulted and upset by this. He's lived with this his whole life. Hyrule is 18 years older than Loki. Loki physically, all that fun bit here. And then we cut to Loki causing chaos. So we cut to the villages are being attacked, and it's just like, this is a disaster. King Harald's already left on his voyage. They're coming. Close the doors and get the children inside. And we have Loki storming into this village with a ton of the animals from the underworld. So we see like the giant cat, the giant lion, the monkey, the mammoth, the giant snake, that are like similar, that are either the same or similar creatures to what we saw when he mentioned his friends in the underworld that were the beast before. And he's like, beat them all up, guys. This is Elbath, the world's strongest country. We don't need weaklings here. Loki, driven by scorn, unleashed chaos onto Elbath. So this is just all this time that he was being raised by Estrid's brother, just harping on him and harping on him and blaming him and blaming him and blaming him and everything else like that, mistreating him simply because of stuff that was outside of his control. It's not Loki's fault he has these eyes. It's not Loki's fault that his mother was psychotic, and that she died. None of that is Loki's fault. It's not Loki's fault that Harald is off doing all of this stuff for, yes, the good of the country, but again, it's like this type of a king that is a very good king, not the best father. And throughout history, there have been various kings that have fallen into this trope where it's either they're an amazing king but not a good father, or they're an amazing father but not the best king. And sometimes they are able to be both. They are able to be an amazing king and an amazing father, and they are able to just do wonderfully in that regard. Same thing when it comes to like queens as like mothers versus being the queen, in those regards. Now, I'm not saying that Harald doesn't love Loki. It's just, unfortunately, he has other things that are taking much more of his attention than Loki. And probably the Steward was very good at hiding his, Estrid's brother was very good at like hiding his abuse of Loki whenever Harald was around. So we see that these the beasts are attacking one of the towns, and like all the other giants are trying to like protect the children and everything else like that. It's like he laughed at the feeble as they ran, and we see Hyrule showing up, and he's like trying to challenge Loki, and he's just like, hey, Loki, Dad went through hell to rebuild this village. And we have Loki coming over to Hyrule, and Loki is much taller than Hyrule, even though he's younger. He's like, huh? You think you get to call my father dad? I don't get why everyone respects him. He's dumb for trying to play nice with those human insects. And Hyrule's like, that's crap. And he's trying, and he's like got his sword pointing at Loki. And he's like, we should all try to see from each other's perspectives. Don't get cocky just because you're big. And Loki just picks up his Kanabo and bam! Right into Hyrule. Just like, being cocky is my right. I'm the prince. Don't you dare talk back to me, runt. And again, this is going into what we saw in some of those little flashbacks previously, from like Hyrule's perspective in regards to dealing with Loki, where it's like Harald wants them to get along. He wants them to be brothers. He wants them to be able to be friends. But there's so much going against that. There's a Game of Thrones comparison that can be made here, obviously, just for more cultural references that people would get. Obviously, in Game of Thrones, we have Jon Snow and Robb Stark. And Jon Snow is, of course, considered to be Ned's bastard throughout the majority of the series, and Robb is his true-born son, the heir of Winterfell, for part of the series. And in the case of, Game of Thrones, Jon is essentially raised the same to a degree as the other true-born Stark children of Ned and Catelyn. Catelyn is the one who despises Jon, but she loves all of her children. And Ned still dotes on Jon and raises him the same way that he raises the other children. And Jon and Robb are very close. Very good friends, very much like brothers. Because in each other's mind, they are each other's brothers. And, Jon also has the same bond with Arya and with Bran and with Rickon to a degree. Sansa is the one that he doesn't. And we see that throughout the course of the series. Although one of my favorite scenes in all of Game of Thrones is when Sansa arrives at Castle Black after having escaped Ramsay with the help of Theon and Brienne and Podrick. And they make their way to Castle Black, and Jon is there. And him and Sansa, it's the first time they've seen a member of their family in so long, and they think that they're the only ones that are left. They don't know that Arya and Bran are still alive, and Rickon is still alive at this point in time, but they don't know that. And they just run to each other and hug each other. And of course it means so much more because it's like these are the two Stark siblings that were the furthest apart from each other. Like, Sansa barely recognized Jon as anything beyond her father's bastard because of the way that Catelyn was, and she wanted to be like her mother. In the case that we are seeing here for Loki and Hyrudine, Loki does not want to acknowledge the fact that Hyrudine is his brother, half-brother. So there's a lot there. There's also the side of things where it's like, it could be, and we're going to see this here, where like Loki is clearly jealous of Hyrudine because Hyrudine has friends and stuff like that. We're going to see that in the next couple of panels. Whereas, Loki is very alone. He is very isolated. Yeah, he's a prince, and yes, he has this power, and now with the steward dead however many years ago, he's gained a bit more freedom, and he doesn't have as much of that being poured into his ear, all that poison poured into his ear over and over again by someone who should be protecting him and should be loving him, but doesn't. We see some of that here. And part of what I'm thinking is Loki is, to a degree, jealous of Hyrudine and the fact that he has friends, Gerd and Goldberg and Stanson. We're going to see them, that he's loved by his mother, and he is, not despised by the majority of the island, not blamed for everything that goes bad on the island, whereas Loki, his whole life has been blamed for all of these incidents, even though it's not something that he did, even though he just literally, this is the first one here with him attacking the village. Okay, maybe I don't think he was responsible for the steward's death, for his uncle's death, but it could have just been that, something happened. Something attacked him. The guy jumped. I don't know. Maybe Loki did push him, but it wasn't his intention to kill the guy. And so he's like, fine, I'll just be the bad guy. And, this attacking the village here is one of the first times that we see him intentionally doing something in this regard. Going after someone. Going after the village and causing this pain. So Loki attacks Hyrudine, and then we have Gerd and Goldberg are here, and Stanton is here as well. Little kid versions of all of them. Road is not here. I don't believe we see Road at all in this flashback. Or at least not in this section. But, Gerd's running over, Hyrudine, and Goldberg tries to stop her, and he's like, stay back, he'll think you're his friend. And she's like, Loki will hit you, and she, bam, bops Goldberg on the head, which is funny. And she's like, we are his friends, you dummy. And she's running over and starting to try to check on Hyrudine, and little Stanton shows up there, so they're all there. And it's just he needs first aid. And then we see Loki, and they're in the background, and then we see Loki, and he's just grrr. He's angry about this because he's just and there's his friends again, and he's just laughing at this. And he's just you're so pathetic. I could puke, Hyrudine. You're just a group of weaklings huddling together. It's because of your mom's filthy blood. And we see this, Hyrudine's crying still, and he's trying to wipe away the blood on his face from where he got hit. And Gerd's trying to perform first aid on him. And we cut to the next panel, and it's just the four of them, no Road, but the four of them, and Stanton's angry, as he's glaring at Loki. And then in the background, we see, like, the village is still being attacked and everything. But it's, these four are, like, the core of the new giant warrior pirates, and then we'll have Road there as well. But we have these four here. And we have, like, the guards trying to talk Loki down. It's just like, young master, that's going too far. He's still the son of the king. He's also a prince. And Loki then shouts at him, don't call him a prince. And then he bashes both of them with his Konobo. Given the way that a child's mind can work, I am kind of curious as to whether or not Loki is doing this, A, out of jealousy, because he has all of this heaped on top of him for being the one responsible for all of this death and destruction and everything else like that. So he's just fine. I'll be the chaos version of the chaos and destruction version of the sun god. And also out of jealousy of Hyrule, but also he sees what it's like on this side. And he also might be looking at this as like, Hyrudine's life is better than mine because his mother loves him. He has friends who clearly care about him. And a good chunk of the country cares about him as well. And if this is what it's like for me to be a prince, and this is what I go through here, I don't want my big brother to have to go through this as well. And it might be something like that. And it's this anger toward their father, where it's just like he sees Harald's ideals reflected in Hyrule, and Loki is jealous about that because Hyrule is embracing those and is trying to do what he can. Same thing with Ida. And Loki is being ignored for those same ideals. So there's a lot of that there. So Loki is just like attacking other people. And it's like Loki spread pain and destruction, but nothing he did filled the hole in his own heart. And like we cut around, we see like a mother clutching their child who may have been hit by Loki or was hurt by the animals. And we see Loki just like trying to hold back tears, and he ends up back in the underworld. He like jumps down into the underworld or falls into the underworld, probably falls. Or jumped himself down there. And he's like laying there, and he's pulled the bandages off of his eyes. And he's just like tears pouring down his cheeks. And he's just like, I can't even die. And it's, again, we saw this mentality similar to Kaido. With Kaido, the first thing that we see when we're introduced to Kaido is him jumping off a balloon terminal and landing on the island where Kid, Killer, Apu, and Hawkins are. And he was essentially trying to off himself. And it didn't work. And then like just all of these things that Kaido has done again and again and again and again is try to have a meaningful death. And Loki seems like he's kind of trying to do that here. We see that he is bleeding as in he is injured from his fall. But it's like this fall didn't kill him as a baby. It's not going to kill him now. And he's just like, I can't even die. And then we get to the last double page spread of this chapter. There was like at least 2, 3 double page spreads in this chapter alone. But this last 2 pages of the chapter, last bit that everybody's talking about, that's going to get a bunch of videos made about it, I'm sure. We cut still down in the underworld. We see Loki lying on the ground, just like looking up. Tears coming down his face, and we hear shouting. We also see a mountain get cut in half and fall to the side, and it's just like, what's the deal with this island? Where's the welcome committee? And like we see like this bear and this wolf are like freaking out and growling and roaring at the intruders, and we see these 4 humans walking up toward Loki, and like again they're dwarfed by his size, and it's just like, oh ho, we found one. Look, it's a giant whelp. It's like, this is definitely Elbath. And these are the Rocks Pirates. Or possibly the makings of the Rocks Pirates. We see Shiki, and he's just like, ha ha ha, this brat's got one hell of a devil face. And Loki is still crying, trying now to stop crying. And we have Whitebeard, who's much more on the concerned side of things, and he's just like, I know he's a giant, but isn't he a bit too big? Hey, kid, why are you crying? And again, this is just like, Whitebeard is going to knock Rox later for the fact that Nox, like, stabbed Loki for no reason and all of that. And, in this case, it's just like, okay, well, the kid's crying. We should probably find out why the kid's crying. Are you okay? Type of a thing. It's just like his fatherly instincts kicking in. Continuing. We see Whitebeard. We see Shiki. And we see a female who is, given the hairstyle, most likely supposed to be Miss Bocking or Buckingham Stussy, the original version that was on the pirate crew. Although she doesn't look as small as she was, because this is not Big Mom. This is most definitely not Big Mom. We don't know the exact time frame that Big Mom joined the Rox Pirates, but this is definitely not Big Mom. Big Mom's hair is much, much longer than this, and she always has, like, her coat that she has on, and she always has, like, her hat. She has Napoleon, and, very distinctive. Also, I think it's stated that Big Mom has not been back to Elbath since she left as a child with Mother Caramel and the Sheep's House, with the Lamb's House children. Stated that she has not been back since then. So this would not be Big Mom anyway. So this has to be Stussy. Because it's not dressed in, like, the Kuja style, so it's not Gloriosa. So we get the, narrator. Harald spotted this particular man 8 years ago during the reverie. He single-handedly killed a Navy HQ admiral and vanished without a trace. This feat earned him a massive bounty and the government's ire. And we get to the last member that we are introduced here. And he's like, all right, kid, you better say yes to both these questions. I ain't the type that takes no for an answer. First off, this is Elbath, land of the giants, yeah? Second, we'll find Harald here, yeah? And now we get the face reveal for Rox D. Xebec, future captain of the Rox Pirates, as it is stated here, and father of Emperor Blackbeard. So we get the face reveal, and he's got, like, the spiky wild hair that we kind of saw in, like, all the silhouette versions of him. It's, like, black and white streak, or at the very, it's, like, black with, like, streaks in it. And he very much has, like, similar facial features to Teach. So we're getting that. Then again, sometimes how Oda draws characters, sometimes even men will look similar to each other. Like, Kaido and Harald look similar to each other. I saw a similarity here where someone was, like, comparing Rox's face to, like, Buggy. I'm like, sure, why the heck not? But it is very specifically stated here, father of Emperor Blackbeard. So we finally get that confirmation here where Xebec is the father. You are the father of Blackbeard, of Marshall D. Teach. So the Marshall part probably comes from Teach's mother. And it's also what allows him to hide the fact that he is truly Rox D. Xebec's son. Now, of course, we've gone through this already where, like, we know that Blackbeard is old enough that he would have been before the God Valley incident, and it would have just been, like, Teach's mother who possibly raised him for a little while and then passed away. I also know that there was supposed to be, like, sketch art where we see Blackbeard's mother, and we were supposed to see, like, his sisters, that they were supposed to be involved at some point in time. They could still come into play. We'll see what happens. But it is confirmed here that Xebec is Xebec is Blackbeard's father. So we get that confirmation here. The whole spotted at, the reverie 8 years ago, so that was the reverie that Harald had managed to infiltrate as a guard for a king. And quite certain the world government would have known who he was anyway, but they allowed it, I'm assuming. Otherwise he was, like, completely hidden on, like, under a helmet or something like that, to keep his identity a secret. Quite possible. And it is stated here that Xebec killed a Navy HQ admiral. So this would have been whatever one of the 3 admirals around at the time. This would not have been Garp. This would not have been Sengoku. Possibly a colleague of Kong's, given the time frame. Because Kaido, as much as, as quickly as Garp probably rose through the ranks. Also, this is 48 years ago, and I did the math. Kaido would only be like 11 at this point in time, so he's not going to be on the Rocks Pirates yet. This is like a very basic version of the crew with like Whitebeard and Shiki and Stussy. Buckingham Stussy for misbalking. So we see this. So Xebec killed an admiral at this reverie, and then he just vanishes, and that's how he gets like this huge bounty. I don't believe we've been told what Rox's bounty was. Now, given the fact that we know that Roger had the highest active bounty at one point in time, for a pirate, we don't know what Dragon's bounty is. That hasn't been revealed to us yet. But I believe the current highest active bounty in the story is, I think, Xebec. Or is not Xebec, is Blackbeard at the moment. I think he's the one that has the highest bounty. No. What am I thinking? It's Shanks. Shanks is the one with the highest bounty. Duh. Not Blackbeard. Shanks. But, so, Xebec killed an admiral and then just up and left. He may have been there as a king at the reverie, or they attacked the reverie and killed him that way. Somehow showed up, killed him, and then left. But we don't know. So that's what we have here. There should be a chapter next week as far as I'm aware. I'm hoping so. And I'm going to get this done. And I have to work this evening. Fun. And then tomorrow I get to go to the Cornhusker State Games, which is actually like a Nebraska exclusive version of the Olympics. And my nephew, Kai, who's the one that you've seen that did the Fresno Nightcrawler Devil Fruit video with me, he's going to be they're going to be competing in a couple of the different track events at the games. So we're going to be there cheering them on, wishing them luck, all that stuff. So that's what I have here. I thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry this is a longer video, but there was a lot to go through here. And I went on a couple of tangents, but that's what you get when it comes to me. So I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!